Okay, this little video then is looking at significant figures, and it goes along with the video I've done on decimal places. And like decimal places, significant figures are there to make use of numbers more meaningful and more related to everyday use. But they do it in a slightly different way to decimal places. So let's look at an example. So in the decimal place video, I talked about the fact that we might write down our mass in kilograms. And if we did so, it would be meaningful to have 3 decimal places to represent grams. Now, in terms of significant figures, I might decide that actually knowing my mass to the individual gram or even 10 grams is not particularly helpful because it's such a small amount. So I might say that I only really want to see my mass to 3 significant figures, in which case I'm only looking at the first 3 numbers. And this is taking me down now to the nearest 100 grams, which is probably accurate enough for understanding how heavy I am. Similarly, if I've got a very large number, so I might be looking at an answer in joules, which is often going to run to the thousands. And again, if I'm looking at 1 joule, it's not a great deal of energy. I might be more interested in simply knowing that there's 30,000 or 32,000 joules involved. So again, by choosing a certain number of significant figures, I might make that number more meaningful. And lastly, we talked about decimal places. If I have a lot of zeros in here, and then I try and write this number to 2 decimal places, then clearly the number of decimal places is pointless. It's just going to turn that number into 0. And in fact, what we could do is we could put it into standard form, which we look at in year 10. But at the moment, it would make much more sense to look at significant figures, and then I can look at the numbers I've actually got there. So let's look at some examples. Let's have a look at this number here. And let's say I want to have that to 2 significant figures. Now, I'm not looking for a decimal point this time, I'm looking for 2 significant figures, and we're looking at the biggest numbers or highest value numbers, so we start at the left. So there's my 2 numbers. The same rule applies as does for decimal places, in that I now have to consider what this number is here next to it. If the number is smaller than 5, so 1, 2, 3, 4, then we ignore it. If it's larger than 5, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, then I have to change what happens here. So because this is less than 5, I ignore it. Now, we don't just scrub out these numbers, we replace them with zeros. So this is 76, then 0, 0, 0, 0 to 2 significant figures, or in this case, 760,000. Let's have a look at another example. In this one, let's have 188,214. And again, to go to 2 significant figures, I take the 2 largest value numbers, so I'm working from the left. And again, I have to consider the value of the next number. Now, this is obviously higher than 5. So it is quite significant because 188 is very close to 190. So I need to move that number up here. So this becomes 1 and then a 9. Then again, I replace all of these numbers with zeros. So now I've got 190,000. And again, it's really important that we label this to significant figures because it tells us that there is some detail missing, which we've decided isn't important, but somebody else needs to be aware that we've removed that detail from our answer. And then the last example I'm going to have a look at is when we have a lot of zeros involved. So let's put in something like this. And again, significant figures, we take the first 2. I'm going to go to 2 significant figures for this example as well. And here, we draw the line here, and there's a 0 here. So when we do this to 2 significant figures, all of these will turn to 0. This is less than 5. I end up with 40,000. Some people get quite upset about not leaving that little number there. It's fine, because 40,000 is a fair representation of that number to 2 significant figures. And because we've labelled it correctly, then anybody looking at this will be aware there may be some detail missing. So that's perfectly fine. Now, I've used 2 significant figures all the way through these examples because that's the most common request at GCSE. You're not expected to do every answer to 2 significant figures, although you don't get penalised for it necessarily, but the questions will ask. So check if the question asks for significant figures, and if they do, then just apply this method. Hope that's useful. Good luck.